Hi there, I'm Clarissa from the Fundy Biosphere Reserve. I'm here with the town of Riverview, and in this two-part series, we're going to teach you all about pollinators and how to make bee boxes to support native bees. The Fundy Biosphere Reserve is a UNESCO designation that recognizes the unique natural and cultural heritage of the Bay of Fundy watershed. We at the Biosphere work to connect people to that heritage to build sustainable communities. So what is pollination? Well, pollination is the mechanism by which plants reproduce. This happens when pollen from one flower lands on the stigma of another flower, like you can see here in this diagram. This can be done in different ways, including by the wind, but we're going to focus on pollination done by bugs and animals. Flowers will produce a sugary liquid called nectar to invite hungry pollinators to crawl around inside the flower and pick up pollen on their bodies. The pollinators will then go to eat from another flower and bring the pollen from the first flower, allowing pollination to occur. The pollen will travel down the stigma to the ovary, and the plant will use it to make seeds. The flower and the pollinator both win in this interaction. The flower gets to reproduce, and the pollinator gets a yummy snack. So why are the pollinators so important? Well, they're so important because many of the plants and food crops that we rely on need someone to carry their pollen to other plants. Without these pollinators, plants will not be able to set fruit or reproduce, and we would face a massive food shortage. Pollinators face many threats worldwide, but the most important is widespread pesticide use. In places where pollinators have dropped to extremely low levels, people have had to start pollinating plants by hand, like you can see in this picture. There are 8 major groups of pollinators, 7 of which are important in New Brunswick. First off are the butterflies. They use their straw-like mouthparts to slurp up the nectar from long, tube-shaped flowers, and in the process they get pollen on their face and feet from perching on the flowers. The next group, the hummingbirds, do pretty much the same thing. Their faces get covered in pollen when they use their extra long beak to get at the nectar. A hungry hummingbird can visit up to 3,000 flowers in a day, so they're really good pollinators. Ants pollinate as they march around looking for food, but they aren't always the best pollinators because many species produce chemicals that are meant to kill diseases, but that can also kill pollen. Beetles like to eat the petals and pollen of flowers, and they pollinate as they go around destroying flowers, which is why they are nicknamed mess and soil pollinators. Flies, moths, and bats take over pollination at night and visit flowers that only open up after dark. Flowers that bloom in the day usually have bright colors to help pollinators find them, but that doesn't work when it's dark out. So many night blooming flowers aren't as colorful, but are instead very smelly so that they can be found in the dark, and they often produce pretty yucky smells to help attract the flies. You may have noticed that I mentioned bats, but they aren't listed above, and that's because while some places bats are very important pollinators, here in New Brunswick most of our bat species are insectivorous, meaning that they eat bugs, so they don't do much pollination. But they're still super important because they eat up all of our mosquitoes. I saved the most important pollinators for last, which are of course the bees we're all here to talk about. There are over 20,000 recorded species of bees worldwide, 3,600 of which are native to North America. There are more than 200 recorded species just here in New Brunswick. Bees are by far the best pollinators of this list for many reasons. Bees are visiting flowers in search of pollen to feed to their young, and are therefore designed to pick up as much as they can. Many bees are furry because the hairs pick up pollen super well. In contrast, these other pollinators are after the nectar of the flowers and only pick up pollen by accident. While many other pollinators, like butterflies, sit on the outside of the flowers and only get a little pollen on their mouth and feet, bees have to crawl all the way inside and get coated from head to toe. Bees also have a special behavior called flower constancy, which means they will generally visit only one kind of flower on a given foraging trip. This is important because pollination happens between flowers of the same kind, so when pollinators skip from species to species, they're not pollinating effectively. The bee boxes we are building today will support our native bee species, which is especially important because they've co-evolved with our native plants and ecosystems, and are thus best suited to preserve the natural functioning of our biosphere. Now I'm sure you have the typical idea of bees as colonial organisms, that they all live in a nest and work together to support one queen, like in honeybees, but this is not the case for most of our native species. Over 90% of these bees are solitary, meaning that they don't live in colonies or hives. They hatch from a single egg and grow up alone, and they only really interact with other bees for mating purposes. Many solitary bees are stingless, or they'll only sting if they're trapped and squeezed, making them safe to invite into your yard. These boxes will provide a nesting habitat for these bees. These will specifically be helping out mason bees, but other native bees have very similar nesting habits and will benefit just as much. So that's all the information I have for you today. We're just going to go over the supplies you'll need for next time before we finish. Our bee boxes will be made from recycled cans. The bigger the size you can get, the better, but whatever you can get will work. You'll also need some bamboo sticks, which can be found at most hardware stores, cut down to a little shorter than the depth of your can. So if your can is about 10 centimeters tall, your bamboo should be about 9 centimeters. Finally, you'll need some small twigs and pine cones to finish out the supplies. You may also want some hockey or duct tape to cover the sharp edges of the cans, but it's not necessary. You can also choose to paint your can, but that's up to you and we won't be covering that in the next session. Next time we'll be learning a bit about the bees that will use the box, how to assemble it, and how to care for it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.